Hello, Arkana viewers. Today I would like to welcome poet and professor Drew S. Cook. Um, Drew is the co-executive editor at Trio House Press, and he's been published at Pleiades, Nimrod, and elsewhere. Welcome, Drew.
Hey, thanks.
So, today I asked you to speak because I know there's something that you feel quite strongly about, and I know that it's a certain something which is very important to Arcana, and that topic is neurodivergence.
Yeah.
So, I've done my reading, but before we get started, I would like to hear your own definition of neurodiversity and neurodivergence. What is it and what is it not?
Yeah, well, that's our terms here are kind of evolving rapidly. Originally, neurodivergent was used in the autism community
Hmm.
and began as a way for members of that community and people who care about them to speak about themselves without using ableist language.
Hmm.
Um, However, as the term implies, divergence means, something that diverges. And after a few years of seeing that term in conversation, we're starting to see it used to refer to anybody who doesn't fit inside what I suppose is a narrow um, expectation of normalcy up here.
Hmm.
So that could include um, disorders, mental illnesses, uh, places on the spectrum as well. Um, and the diversity piece of it, I think, is an effort to, again, I think, taking inspiration both from the autism community as well as our friends in the disability rights community to celebrate these differences rather than look at them as kind of ugly or blights
Hmm.
on uh, a person's existence or society, a drain on society, which is a very old way of looking at disability and mental health issues. We you look back at the eugenics movement and some of the ugliness in Europe in the middle of the 20th century, and there's a lot of ideas that even persist today about who should and who should not be having children, what constitutes, um, who can participate in this concept of human potential and who can't.
Hmm.
And so all of those things are kind of wrapped up in this question of neurodiversity. As far as what it isn't, um, well, I know one thing it isn't. I know that when a white guy blows up people in Austin,
Hmm.
and we have a puff piece about how he must have snapped and his parents are Christian, mental illness.
Hmm.
That's not really about neurodiversity. That's about garbage in our discourse today.
Hmm.
When somebody shoots up a school and we don't want to do gun control,
Yeah.
we're too cowardly to govern.
Hmm.
So we, bring summon mental illness like some kind of Pokemon. Uh, that's not neurodiversity.
Yeah.
When people who don't want to provide health care to Americans start whining about health issues, we know that's not neurodiversity.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, it doesn't have anything to do with political gamesmanship or attempting to manipulate privilege in some way.
Mm. Very good. I was curious. How do neurodivergence and neurodiversity come up in relation to writing, um, both in the creation and in the consumption? I guess why is it important in your view?
Um, well, I guess I'd try to speak in a really personal way first. It's important to me because I know, even though I get to participate in the full spectrum of human life, and you know, if I see a kitten and I think it's cute, I want to pet it just like anybody else. There's a lot of parts of my inner life that I think people who don't, my particular challenge is bipolar. I'm a bipolar one. You know, people who haven't experienced that can't really access what those parts of my inner life are like. It's closed away. And so writing, for me, specifically writing poetry, this is one of the reasons I write poetry, is because we're really talking about a limits of language problem and the relationship between language and thought, right? And so if language is tailored to somehow accommodate a certain mode of thinking, you know, and I have an experience that really language is not tailored to address, then how am I going to say, how am I going to unlock whatever it is in my head? Well, since poetry relies so heavily on metalinguistic elements, well, you know, my kind of poetry does. We rely so heavily on metalinguistic elements, you know, whether we're talking about sound, presentation on the page, you know, the way we cut things and arrange them. These are all ways we can insert meaning without words. And so for me, that's an opportunity to get at these very difficult um, to access parts of my experience uh, using things that aren't language to manipulate language. So it's very important to me personally as a writer. Um, I mean, as a reader, and I think as a human being, these things are important, right? Because we want to be in tune with human experience, and we want to understand things that aren't uh, maybe just like our story. Alternately, we want to find things that we can access because there's some sort of solidarity, you know, so recognition, those two things, either vicarious experience of some kind of difference or that kind of deep connection that we sometimes feel with art. You know, both are really important. And this is a place where I think writing can do a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually fits in with my own experience writing graphic novels and addressing anything to do with emotion and mental health. Um, it's I have thought that writing illustrated narrative and using it in that way is very similar to poetry in a lot of ways, and that it kind of captures those things that language has limits.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's excellent. Now I'm curious, what are some of the challenges you've encountered as a writer in regards to this topic? You know, both on the creation and consumption end.
Um, well, on the writing end, very simply, it's hard to write about things if your language isn't tailored to address them. So there are lots of personal challenges in creating the work. I think also um, there's a I find sometimes looking out that there's sort of a performative expectation. Um, there's with regard to what I would call mental illness writing. I think people by and large like, you know, inspiring stories or stories of triumph over adversity or, um, you know, things that are sympathetic and tragic. Uh, and there isn't always space, I think, for the kind of complexity that real life, um, you know, offers us. So, um, you know, what about an unlikable mentally ill person or somebody who isn't very self-aware and keeps acting like a jerk and blaming everybody else? You know, that's real life, you know, but I don't know that there's a huge market for this kind of depth and breadth of experience. Um, in the disability community, they call that kind of appetite a desire for inspiration porn, is what they call it. You know, it's like, well, he's a lucky little fella. He never gave up, you know, and yeah, we all like that kind of thing. But I think it's unhealthy to expect anybody to tell a certain kind of story, you know, um, and I think it gets especially weird here because not everybody who has a problem with mental illness wants maybe to be open about it and talk about it the way we're talking about it right now. Um, in fact, I don't really like talking about it that much openly. I made a conscious decision. When did I make that? It was before I came here. Can I go off topic for a second?
Sure.
Yeah, so, you know, I had this big meltdown and I basically ruined my life. And no, I'm not going to tell y'all all about it, but I ruined my life. And, you know, there was a career and a lot of property and, you know, people I cared about, it all just collapsed in on me. And I went back to Hot Springs because that's where I grew up. It's where my parents live and tried to get my act together. And um, one of the things that happened while I was living in this trailer on the outskirts of town um, were the Ferguson riots. And I was watching these things, and you know, a lot of my, you know, friends, I mean Facebook friends, okay, not friends, right? Because we all have hundreds of Facebook friends, but we don't have hundreds of close friends. At least I don't. Maybe you guys do. But anyway, a lot of those friends um, that some of which I unfriended would, you know, were posting things like, you know, memes of Martin Luther King lecturing people about how to, you know, be oppressed. You know, like Martin Luther King didn't burn things. Why are you? You may have seen some of these things float around. Yeah, they were so toxic and gross. Um, and yeah, I had to unfriend a lot of those people. But it really got me thinking about the fact that as bad as my experience had been, and it had been really bad, I'm not taking any, what sucked, sucked. Um, but imagine how bad it would have sucked if I also had to like worry about um, getting shot by police every time I acted crazy in public. You know, because I acted crazy in public a lot. You know, but people who look like me don't usually get shot for acting crazy in public. And so part of this experience of, I guess, recovering from all of that was thinking about um, how even survival of it was a privilege, and that all kinds of people suffer from mental illness and don't want to talk about it, and probably are not in a position to talk about it. You know, there may be pushback in their own community, wherever they're from. There may be more kind of gross and toxic assumptions about them than they already have to deal with. As a real simple example, you think about women in the workplace and how they have to deal with, oh, well, they're too emotional, you know, or think about the word passion. Passion in the workplace is like code for you're an over emotional woman. That's how people use that. Well, she's so passionate. That's what they mean. Imagine having to deal with that kind of nonsense, and then having everybody also know that you're bipolar. You know, nobody would ever listen to you probably, because that's the kind of crap that goes on. And so I thought, well, I do need to talk about this because I can afford to. You know, I have a certain amount of privilege, and so I'm in a position to talk about this that most people aren't. You know, and so I should experience the embarrassment of talking about it. As far as the kinds of things, I mean, people do sell you short sometimes. They think, you know, if you're upset about something, you know, it's real easy to dismiss you being upset. You know, make it seem like your valid concerns aren't valid because you're, you know, prey to your emotional nature or whatever. People will tell you that you shouldn't have children or breed. I've been told, you know, people like you shouldn't breed. Um, there have been people I've dated whose parents couldn't know because they wouldn't have accepted it. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of, I guess, secrecy you have to have about it, or else you're just going to face foolishness. Um, and I think that's the hardest thing about it is there's not a lot of solidarity because most people don't want to deal with um, being treated differently once people know. Um, so it's hard to connect with people and commiserate, um, which kind of ties into I know kind of the AWP experience was part of this. You know, I really was hoping when I went there that there would be some opportunities to find people who maybe had problems similar to mine, and how that affected their writing. I was looking for role models, if I can be honest. Um, some people who have had success, who I could maybe look up to. And there was one thing that would have been good, but unfortunately I was already booked to volunteer, um, and that was it. So I mean that's one of the things that stinks about it is you go places looking for yourself, and I mean you don't find it.
Well, I really appreciate you, opening up like this with me.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Well, actually, you just addressed like my next two questions. So, I was going to ask, do you have any advice for writers? I mean, or editors and their staff, on this topic?
Well, I think I'm not going to make a stay in your lane argument. I think any sensitive person who has a desire to know something about the experience of other people and is willing to put in the time can write very fine things about mental illness. With that said, I've read some incredibly silly and insensitive things where people don't seem to have wanted to do that work, where they just wanted to use mental illness really as kind of a mechanical means to use non-standard language or do something adventurous in their grammar and syntax. And um, you know, I think anybody who wants to write about mental illness with no direct experience should really just look at their motives. If you're not looking to portray human beings, if you're just wanting to horse around with punctuation or whatever, you can do that without bringing mental illness into it. Writing's a big tent these days, and nobody's,
Yeah.
pulling out the Chicago Manual of Style. If you want a 2-page run-on sentence, you can just do that, okay? You don't have to pretend you're manic. You don't have to do that.
Most of the mentally ill people I know do actually have a pretty solid understanding of grammar.
Yeah. So that would be my only thing is like, as for somebody who isn't in this space and wanting to write about it, just treat it like you would treat any other subject that merits research. As far as people writing about this stuff, I mean, I don't know, keep hustling. I I haven't had a lot of luck with my first book, and I think I'll have better luck with my second. I think the first one is kind of there's some good poetry in it, but I don't know that anybody wants to read such a kind of ugly, unsympathetic thing, and I understand that. I say, shame on you people for not wanting to read that. Maybe I needed to write that more for me than for anybody else. I think, and I think with regard to editors, I think you should just kind of think about it the way you would think about anything, if you're not inside that community, you know, I would just think about it the way you think about things, other subjects where you're not inside the community. You know, be thoughtful and you know, try not to just pick things that are inspiring and feel good. You know,
Yeah.
that that's what I see more than anything else. Is it's either this like kind of suffering, like just black, unleavened, you know, dry misery, or else it's this kind of overcoming story. And there are just so many more stories about people than those two.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would just say is to remember that, as I already said, this is an intersectional issue. So um, you know, remember that this is a problem that isn't like any other problem or any other type of challenge in our, you know, our big white patriarchal mess we're in right now. It's something, it's just another issue in there. And so if you're facing another challenge in society, this is going to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, always be sensitive of the way these things collide and how it impacts people. Um, I guess that would be the main thing I would want to leave people thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time, Drew. Now, if people would like to read your work or follow you, where can they find you?
Well, my Facebook profile is public, so you can find me as Drew S. Cook. On there. I have a Twitter, but y'all don't want to look at that Twitter. I just know you don't. And you know, I do. You know, if you just randomly see this and want to talk about writing, you can PM me. I'll talk to anybody. I love talking about writing. So you know, don't be shy. Um, yeah, that's the best place to look. Facebook.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Drew.
You bet. Thanks for asking.
All right.